The Galtxagoriak had become a society. But there is one thing the Wetlanders fear more than monsters of the wastes. It is sharing land with a neighbor. And while the Galtxagoriak were armed with iron blades and armored with the best hides they could muster, they did not have the experience needed to outcompete their elders. Thus, they were cast deeper into the waste, where their newfound skills were stressed to the breaking point against the monsters that lurked. The people once more cried out for Gob to help them, and Gob thought of the tales that predated even his own race. The tales of mortals who challenged the gods. They had learned all they could from their elders. To survive where others couldn't, he would need to outwit their creators. It so happens that his schemes had already caught the attention of one of the gods, the god Basajaun, whom the Sidhe named Beshaba, said to be a god of mighty secrets and clever schemes. Beshaba was feared by the Manwas, who slaughtered people at the foot of a mighty volcano to placate her wrath. Gob journeyed to their temple and called out to her.
Vapor-wreathed Basajaun, keeper of secrets, matron of magma. I seek much knowledge that only you can offer. I am prepared to challenge you for it, in whatever way you deem suitable.
Basajaun, to whom even the elves fear, was both amused and offended in equal measure, as only a goddess of strife can manage, and condensed the toxic vapors of the volcanoes into her shape.
Tiny mortal, whose people scrape the moss of rocks for sustenance, and hide from the wolves with toxic skin. I accept your challenge.
Her words were dizzying, and it took some measure of constitution to not be overwhelmed, but Gob held strong. He watched as more vapor took shape into an audience of demigods that followed the Lady of Discord. They watched keenly as the challenge was laid out.
I will ask you a question that will stretch the limits of your knowledge, and you will attempt to do the same to me. Whoever cannot answer is at the mercy of the victor.
Gob accepted these terms.
What is the sound of one hand clapping?
Gob laughed and said,
A loud crash that is heard for miles. For when Orko, whom the race of Beltravin and Manwas call Numbus, throws his thunderbolts, is it not with one hand? And do they not call it a thunderclap?
Whisper-shrouded Beshaba was caught off guard by the unusual answer, but the audience seemed pleased at the novelty. Gob further confused her by asking a relatively simple question.
Of the metals and alloys, which is the strongest resonance with knowledge?
Such a simple question that any magically inclined smith would already know. But the goddess would not let herself be tricked into overthinking something with a simple answer.
Copper. The flexible, ductile metal copper resonates with knowledge. Anyone knows that.
Gob nodded and made a mental note to himself.
Without thinking of good or evil, show me your original face before your mother and father were born.
Gob answered by squinting, crinkling his nose, and pursing his lips in a comical manner.
What are you doing, mortal?
The goddess asked.
I apologize, goddess of the broken circle, but you see, before I was born, I was much smaller. And before my parents were born, even smaller still. And this is as small as I can manage to make my face.
He attempted to make his face smaller by pressing his palms into his cheeks. The demigods in the audience roared with laughter and demanded the goddess allow the novel answer to pass. She begrudgingly agreed, to which Gob asked,
What is the most efficient recipe for a health potion that can remain potent when boiled?
Again, Beshaba, who the people called Basajaun, was stunned.
2 measures of arrowroot, mixed with monk's hood in a water base, with a powdered wolf's femur. The gods call this aquavitae, the water of life.
And so they traded questions. Each time, the goddess asked an abstract mind-bender that Gob would wrestle with, then subvert into a comedic technical truth. And in response, Gob would ask practical questions he himself secretly did not know. How to temper steel into master craftsmanship. How one finds water in the desert. What part of a thunder shrimp is edible? And thus his knowledge grew, till he asked the greatest question that man was not allowed to know.
How does a mortal perform the magic of dragons?
The secrets of ritual magic were forbidden to teach mortals. So enraptured was she that Beshaba could not think of a workaround without losing the game, and was thus put in intellectual checkmate. She conceded defeat. More importantly, Gob noticed that she did not say they can't, but such is a tale for the she to tell. And so, with volcanic Basajaun's blessing, Gob entered his hut and began constructing. He extracted copper from the earth, and blood from his own veins, and many things lost to time, and from the cold metal he built himself many sons and daughters. With Basajaun's blessing he bestowed into them the spark of life, and the race of copper rose to their feet. Like copper, they were flexible and swift, and resonated strongly with knowledge and secrets. Like their father, they knew to lay low and wait, to observe before acting. They were his little lab assistants, whom he called the Goblins. As they worked in the labs, the vapors and chemicals caused their skin to patina to a robust green, like all copper does. And so, long into the night, Gob and his copper children drew up plans to strengthen the Galtxagoriak. He had a blueprint in mind. He needed them to be sturdy and strong, with natural weapons and impenetrable skin to compete with the monsters of the wastes. But he needed even more power than Beshaba had granted him. He needed a more powerful calcinator than even the Dverg could build to truly purify his creation. And this power came to him in the form of a knock at his door. Basajaun's son Sendoa, whom the Shi and Manwas call Sordos, stood before him, with the body of a mighty snake man. Slithering Sordos bowed his head and congratulated Gob. Sordos had waited an eternity to watch her be taken down a peg, and that a mere Galtxagoriak be the one to do so brought him no small amount of joy. He offered to help Gob's children build a mighty forge that could burn as hot as the sun, and reduce anything to its bare components. Sendoa, whose coils rest at the root of the world, was gifted with great foresight, and he could see how powerful Gob's people would become. He saw this as an investment, and would call upon them for a favor generations from now. Calculated risks had taken him this far, and so Gob accepted, and with Sordos' help, his children built a mighty furnace 20 cubits long, 40 cubits wide, and many spans into the sky where the winds could feed the fire. And he gathered the Galtxagoriak together and explained his plan. Gob and his children showed the progress he had made in metallurgy, in alchemy, and in miracle working. He would reforge the Galtxagoriak into a people mightier than any who came before them. He did not expect many to comply. The forging required only the strongest components, and you would have to burn countless people alive to purify their body parts into something workable. And yet, the unthinkable happened. So moved were the Galtxagoriak that every last man, woman, and child offered themselves to the great kiln, gladly burning alive in the heat of a small sun, and be reduced to their raw elemental ash. That ash, that which could not be burned any further, that which could endure inconceivable heat and hardship, was mixed with tin and copper to make a magical bronze. From this bronze he made man and woman, Shuruk and Gashnach, who carried inside themselves the souls of the entire Galtxagoriak people. Shuruk was sculpted with mighty metal talons, and from his hands extended powerful brass claws. Gashnach's muscles were thick, and when she flexed she could shatter the teeth of a bear trying to bite her. Gob embraced his creations, and wept mournful tears, for they were living grave markers for every ancestor who came before them. Where his tears fell, their faces were chemically changed, and they bore black splotches, forever marking them as their father's children. Their elder siblings, the Goblins, taught Shuruk and Gashnach all that their father had stolen from the races of Gaia, and as their final purification, they were sent deeper into the wastes to test their survival. For the mighty furnace of Sordos was but one step in the ritual of strengthening. He revealed to Gob that the wastes themselves were one massive crucible, one that allowed only the strong to thrive. And so the second children of God came to call the land Aragoa, the crucible of the world, where the acid rain and abrasive sands corroded their bronze flesh into a protective green patina. They came to call themselves Urukus, the alloyed race, and had many children that would mark with dark splotches, much as their father had marked them. And thus, the orcs rose.